I'm Michelle.
And I'm Lucy.
Welcome to another Cameo episode. These short, quote-unquote, episodes will be slotted in between the other ones and will cover people who made a fleeting yet tantalizing appearance in other episodes. We don't always have a lot of information about them, so they can't have a full episode of their own, but they are too interesting to abandon completely, and they fill in the gaps and enable us to create as full a picture of the era as we can.
And today, John Heron.
John Heron. I
Yes.
vaguely remember the name.
Wildly exciting. He's an accountant.
Ooh!
Yes. Yes. Strap yourself in. We've got an accountant.
Oh, dear. I hope this isn't a TikTok type of accountant.
Oh, no, you're talking young people's talk. I'm not sure what you mean.
When people on TikTok say they're an accountant, apparently they're strippers.
Oh, right. I didn't come across that with John Heron, but that would... Let's imagine that. Imagine he's got nipple tassels on all the time he's doing this.
Oh, my gosh.
Well, there might be some confusion. I came across two John Herons, one of whom was servant to Margaret Beaufort,
Ooh.
and he's the one we're not doing. We're doing
the
other
one that all he had to do was hold the barrels of wine and carry them back and forth from one place to another.
Yes, be ready when she just holds out her glass.
The funnel to the mouth.
Carry her up to bed. Oh, poor Margaret Beaufort. She probably wasn't at all like that.
Probably not.
It was all medicinal. All medicinal. Well, John Heron was born sometime before 1470.
Okay.
Sometime.
Oh, so he's fairly young.
Yeah, he carries on a while, but he carries on beyond. But he's fairly young when Henry first comes to the throne.
Comes to the throne, takes it violently.
Yes. Slides gracefully onto the throne. And he was the son of your favourite thing, a haberdasher.
Ah!
Yeah.
I love that word. We need to bring that word back.
Well, he was married to a Margaret, of course.
Of course.
Everybody's married to a Margaret. Yeah. And they had at least 9 children.
Oh, poor Margaret.
Yes. One of whom was Giles, who went on to marry Thomas More's daughter Cecily.
Oh.
And that's a happy moment. But then he was executed for treason in 1540.
Oh.
So I expect we might come back across him when we come to do Mary's Reign and do a cameo on him then.
Yeah.
I don't know what Heron did during Richard III's reign, if anything, because since we don't know the exact birth year, it's possible he was too young to be involved in anything.
He'd be 10, maybe.
Yes, he's probably learning his Latin and running about.
Ego sum femina.
Well, if he's learning that, then he needs...
Yes, it should be ego sum vir. Sorry.
Yes.
Transgender right at the beginning. Whoops.
He started his career in the employ of Thomas Lovell in 1485, and he was Treasurer of the Chamber. And it's very odd. He's a name that comes up over and over again. He's one of the main players in Henry's reign, and yet you don't really come across anything about him. You just know Thomas Lovell, who was the Treasurer of the Chamber, or Thomas Lovell, who did this. And you think, yeah, but who was he?
And
don't know about him.
If his father's a merchant, why did he go into service? Heron, I mean, not Lovell. Is he a younger son?
He must have had a good eye for figures, I think.
Interesting. Very interesting. And to end up marrying Thomas More's daughter, that's huge too. That's quite the step up.
Well, that's his son married Thomas More's daughter. But yeah, it's the family seems to be on the up.
Yes.
Maybe young John did his dad's haberdasher accounts and discovered he was better at accounting than haberdashing.
Maybe.
Not sure.
If he was a very prominent haberdasher, we know how he ended up seeing Lovell and Moore.
John Heron worked for Lovell, and he'd have been learning on the job, sort of like an apprenticeship. because there's obviously no business school to learn the ropes in those days. You just start and get shouted at so much that eventually you work out what you're meant to be doing. In 1492, Heron became treasurer to the chamber himself. So
it just occurred to me, if people are listening for the first time, they may not know what a haberdasher is.
Well, I'm not sure what it was in those days. I mean, we used to have haberdashers. They're sort of very old-fashioned clothes and fabric and wool, that sort of thing.
Yes.
Frequented by bustling elderly ladies. You wouldn't say that TK Maxx or something like that was a haberdasher. It's a clothes shop. There's a big difference between a haberdasher and a clothes shop now. I don't know what it was then.
Then it was cloth. Fitted cloth that would then be sold for your tailor and or dressmaker to purchase or to make the clothes from that cloth that you've chosen. And quite often, if you go back to some of the financial records that they have, most of them didn't get paid on time. There are substantial debts locked in for several nobles. Like, they'll come in and they'll buy it and then wait for months before they get paid.
I was going to say, I bet it's the nobles' families that don't pay up.
Yep.
It still is. I mean, I do gardening for a living, and it's always the really posh people who are really reluctant to part with their money.
Yeah. Yeah, it's absolutely fascinating looking at how the haberdashers keep on going even though they haven't been paid. How do you keep buying cloth when somebody owes you vast sums of money?
I suppose you don't pay the next people.
Yeah.
And then they don't pay the next people.
And everybody's just waiting for one person to pay.
One phenomenally wealthy person to cough up some money, yeah.
Again, this goes back to that absolutely lovely. Did you ever watch it, the documentary series called A Stitch in Time?
I watched one of them on your recommendation. I watched the one about the picture with the couple.
They're all pictures. The merchant's wife, the green dress.
Yeah, the yards and yards of... Yes, I'm trying to think what they're called.
I can't remember if it's A Stitch in Time or another documentary, but they actually go to a tailor that is still in existence today. And they show the old ledgers that they still have from George IV's time, where he's buying yards and yards of cloth and no payments come through. Yeah. It's just the debt keeps mounting and all the gold frogging he kept buying for his fake military uniforms.
Right? Oh, God.
Yeah.
By 1492, Heron had become the treasurer to the chamber himself. So, worked hard, obviously had a knack for it. And we heard in Reginald Bray's episode, and I think in Hugh Dennis, the Groom of the Stool, that chamber finances became more and more important, especially as it was dealing with bonds and recognizances.
Yeah.
And Heron was in charge of all that. So he's basically in charge of the big box under Henry's bed.
I wonder how much Henry actually trusted him, considering that Henry's initials are beside all of those ledger entries. Like, I am checking every single... Oh, you missed a dot here. There should be 0.01.
Yes, he's not... Doesn't sound like the sort of person you'd want to work for, does he?
No, very micromanaging.
Well, I was just about to say, we said that Richard III was a micromanager. I think maybe you have to be as king, otherwise I'm sure Henry VI wasn't a micromanager and it all spiralled out of control.
Well, Henry VIII definitely wasn't a micromanager.
No.
He let everybody else do it for him.
And it all spiralled out of control.
Yep.
5 original books of payments drawn up by Heron survive.
Oh, that's
and they
so cool.
run from 1495 to 7 and 1505 to 9.
Ooh.
And the first 4 books are signed by Henry. Only the last one isn't. And that's probably due to declining health.
Yeah. Micromanaging.
They all contain a very large number of items of expenditure of a huge variety.
Oh.
They're an absolute godsend because they tell you so much that you wouldn't know at all. Each volume consists of several hundred folios. And apart from the statements of payments, they contain lists of landed revenues, recognizances, obligations, often a list of personal names, which is a bit ominous. It's a bit like the prescription lists you got in Roman times, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah. Put it up on the wall and see if anybody sees your name and then run.
Yes. Debts, the king's wards, liveries of lands, and, most interesting, miscellaneous memoranda.
Oh.
Many of these notes were deleted, presumably when they were paid. Heron's accounts were exempted from the Exchequer audit.
I'm assuming you mean deleted as in crossed out.
Crossed out, yes. Yeah, it wasn't so much like the prescriptions. No, it's the writing was deleted, not the debtors.
Okay.
And Heron's accounts were exempted from the Exchequer audit and were only scrutinised by the king, which to me sounds a little bit dodgy.
Sinister.
Is it usual to have accounts audited only by the person who's going to benefit most from them? I don't think so.
Sounds like a loan shark.
And Henry wasn't the only one to sign off all his accounts. If you look at Elizabeth of York's books of payment, she too signs every page. Sure, it's Elizabeth. Being her name. And I wondered if Henry told her to do that.
Yes, you have to. Meanwhile, she's sitting there just signing as she's reading a book.
Yes.
Oh, no, look, I looked through it.
A very interesting article by Sidney Anglo showed that although Henry VII's reign seems much more boring than Henry VIII's, because I should just warn people, I do have a cold and my voice is going to be sort of going in and out here.
We are so dedicated.
Because it seems more boring than Henry VIII's because there seem to be fewer court festivities and just general fun. But not so, Anglo says. It's just a lack of evidence in Henry VII's era that makes it seem that way. Henry VIII had a specific revels account. Money specifically ring-fenced for celebrations.
Right.
And he had the historian Edward Hall telling us all about the jollities that were going on. And we don't have that with Henry VII. I can't imagine Bernard Andre being interested in jollities. He's interested in poetry battles. But we do have John Heron's account, which paint a very different picture. Henry VII could be fun when he put his mind to it.
Really?
Yeah, it's just you have to trawl through all sorts of other expenditures and winkle out the fun stuff.
Oh.
The article said that the festivities were covered by the king's own costs, but we've seen how he commandeered a larger and larger percent of the court exchequer in that big box under his bed. So, can it really be said to be his own costs?
No.
Was that money would have belonged to the state before?
Probably.
Before Henry, with John Heron's help, started to deflect it. The accounts don't just mention the big set-piece festivals, but also private pleasures like chess and cards.
Which was gambled upon.
Well, yes, they appear in the accounts because, unlike Ferdinand of Aragon, Henry doesn't seem to be very good at them.
Oh, he loses money?
The accounts itemise his debts.
Well, he did, in one, pay off his son.
Yes, he did. He paid him 6 shillings and 8pence. And Henry was only 7. He's still gambling with his 7-year-old son. And there's another payment of £9 for, quote, a loss of cards at Taunton, unquote.
Wow.
So I suppose he was passing the time while he was waiting for Perkin to turn up.
Goodness, that's a lot of money. Doesn't sound like it, but that's a lot of money to lose in a day.
I'd be annoyed if I'd lost £9 for nothing. He doesn't seem to be much good at archery either.
What is he good at? Extortion.
Yes. Well, I don't know whether he's good at tennis, but in 1494 he paid out £4 to, quote, a Spaniard, the tennis player, unquote. So that's seemingly his tennis coach.
Oh.
You don't really think
Or his kid's tennis coach. No, because then he would have made their household pay for them.
Probably.
I wish we had those accounts. We don't have the nursery accounts. At least not that I was able to find. They might be somewhere. I just haven't found them.
Right.
I need everything digitized. Darn it.
Well, it's
Hurry
getting
up on
there.
That.
It is
getting
there.
better. But come on.
We can get an idea of the sort of entertainers Henry favoured. He was very generous to his musicians and other performers. He liked organists, pipers and minstrels, and some were from other great houses, but some were just recorded as, quote, strange, unquote.
Strange?
Foreign.
Right.
I presume he means, or not known maybe, but yes, just strange musicians.
They show up with some weird thing they've made up.
Well, quite possibly, because he liked dancers, tightrope walkers, stilt walkers, puppeteers. Children were paid for, quote, singing in the garden, unquote.
Aww.
Quote, a young damosel that danceth, unquote, was paid £30 in 1493. £30!
Oh dear, what kind of dance was she performing?
I don't know. Perhaps she borrowed Sean Heron's nipple tassels. I'm not sure. But, I mean, I can't explain why it's £30.
Alexander
That's
the
not-
Sixth sent her over. Pope Alexander the Sixth.
That's not the normal sum for entertainers, £30.
That's a fortune.
It is. The very Monty Python-esque man who leapt in Chester was only paid 3 shillings and 4 pence.
Oh dear.
I don't know, maybe he didn't leap very well, I don't know.
He was leaping from one building to another and fell in the poop.
Actors came to Henry's court regularly. My Lord of Essex players appeared at the court for 5 years between 1494 and 1503, as did the Prince's players, and possibly at other times when there were no records.
I wonder what they were playing. Because we don't hear of playwrights there. Did Chaucer write plays? Christopher Marlowe. Was Christopher Marlowe before Shakespeare or after?
I thought they were sort of
Contemporary?
but I think, well, Christopher Marlowe died earlier.
And Chaucer
abruptly.
wrote the Canterbury Tales much earlier. I wonder if he left plays too.
Well, we heard about the one by, was it John Medwall? The one that, what was it, Fulgurins and somebody or other. That's the only one mentioned, but that was because it was written in the vernacular and wasn't about religious subjects. There must have been others. I mean, he was the first, so we hear about him, but there must have been plenty of others that they can't have just sat through passion plays the whole time.
No.
Got so fed up with them. A group of actors led by John English went with Princess Margaret on that long trek to Scotland.
They did have the mystery plays. Sorry, I'm still focused on this. The church mystery plays.
Yeah. I got the impression they were more outdoor, on a trailer type,
Yeah.
visiting town to town. They were the end plays, weren't they? And they're called the end plays because you put in the name of the place, you know, like saying, hello, Taunton.
Yeah.
And everyone cheers.
And everybody cheers. Don't know
Yes. Well, they do in America. They don't seem to do it quite so much in England. Hello, Taunton. Yeah, what do you want?
why. Yeah.
Singers were popular in court. The gentlemen of the chapel received £13, 6 shillings and 8 pence each year. And that's all the gentlemen of the chapel. The whole choir get £13.
And yet a single
demoiselle
dancer
that
got
danced
30. Oh, yeah. I have an image in my head of what the damosel is doing.
The children of the chapel received payments too, as did William Cornish, who wrote the lovely piece of music Our Robin that we used in the Edward Plantagenet episode,
Right.
when we didn't want to put a funny little ditty at the end because it was so sad. And he was almost beaten to death by Richard Empson as well, if you remember.
Yes.
I wanted to do a cameo episode on him because we've not done a musician yet, but there's not much.
No.
Not much, really. Heron's accounts also tell us what gifts Henry was given. He received wild cats from Newfoundland in 1505,
Okay.
and in 1507 he received a dragon.
A dragon.
A dragon. And I've searched, but I couldn't find who gave them those presents. But, yeah, that's handy. It's one of those presents you think, thank you, that's lovely. Now, what the hell do I do with a dragon?
Yeah. Is it a statue?
It's a dragon.
It's a dragon.
That's what it said in the accounts.
Thank you, accounts.
They knew what they were talking about. That's the annoying thing about
the
history.
mother-in-law.
Less savoury activities involved fools.
Oh, yeah.
Henry paid 10 shillings to my Lord Privy Seal's fool, and 40 shillings for John, late of the King of Castile's fool. And I presume that's Philip the Fair.
Oh.
And I would love to know how he came into Henry's employ. I wonder whether he was with Philip when
they
he was
crashed.
shipwrecked.
Yeah.
And then Henry said,
just kept him.
I like your fool. And Philip said, well, he's good, isn't he? Yeah, I like your fool. Oh, he is, isn't he? No, I like your fool. Oh, sorry, Henry, would you like him? But yeah. We don't know whether the money went to the fool or it might have gone to their keepers, as they were called. And the extraordinary thing was how many fools appear in Heron's account. Wat the Fool, Dick the Fool, Pesh the Fool, a fool at Winchester, Lord Cardinal's Fool, Thomas Blackall, the King's Fool, the Fool of Master Knivets, the Duke of York's Fool, Martin the Fool, and John the French Fool.
Wow.
Yeah. More fools than demoiselles, but then demoiselles come a lot more expensive, don't they?
Yeah, I'm thinking of a painting that's Henry and Elizabeth, and their fools are in the background, aren't they?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, they are. They're sort of lurking, peering behind the door.
Yeah.
And a popular pastime was to dress the fool up as a horse, with hilarious consequences, as you can imagine. So, obviously, the king and his court had a very sophisticated sense of humour.
Oh, dear.
Jousting was not Henry's thing. He didn't do it himself, and he didn't really see why he'd pay for other people to do it. Maybe that's why Henry VIII became obsessed with it, because, if you're not allowed to do something as a child, or it's not part of your childhood,
Yeah.
you just go berserk over it when you can.
Mm-hmm.
But there were jousts on special family occasions. Arthur's marriage, Prince Henry's inauguration as the Duke of York, and Princess Margaret's betrothal to James IV of Scotland, and also to welcome in the spring and midsummer. So not only do we know what he did, we know when he did it and why he did it some of the time. We just don't know what that dragon was. We can follow the celebrations from Christmas to Twelfth Night by looking at the expenditure in Heron's accounts. Quote, many and diverse plays, unquote. There you go. They're not just mystery plays.
Well, they could be many and diverse mystery plays.
I suppose so. The gentleman of the chapel sang. The lord or abbot of Misrule was also given money. But the main expense was disguisings. And the sergeant of the king's cellar was given £40 to prepare for disguisings.
I can't remember what that is.
They're a sort of mixture of court masks with carnivals, with floats depicting trees and mountains or whatever. And obviously they must have really gone overboard with these floats to have, if it cost £40 just for one Christmas. And it involved dances by masked performers, and the nobility joined in. It wasn't just something you watched, it was something you did. So I should imagine a fair amount of alcohol was consumed, and it was probably very, very jolly. I mean, you can see where the money went, because William Cornish came into the hall dressed as St. George, followed by a girl dressed as a princess, leading a fire-breathing dragon. Now, is it the same dragon?
Oh, what is this dragon? It's probably a dog dressed up.
Breathing fire? Oh, I don't want to think what they've worked that one out.
Yeah.
Yeah, fed it with chilies? I don't know.
Oh, chilies don't exist yet.
No.
Thank
Well, they do, but not here.
Not here.
And what is really interesting is how so many of these payments for entertainment declined as Henry got older. He just didn't seem to want to be entertained anymore after the deaths of Elizabeth and Arthur and Bray and Jasper Tudor and Morton.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to laugh. When you say declined in my head, I'm like, insufficient funds, check.
Well, I was thinking, we don't go out nearly as much as we used to. We just don't want to anymore.
No.
So perhaps he was the same. He thought, once you've seen one fool, you've seen them all.
Yeah, I was thinking back on my 20s just the other day of how little time I spent at home. And now people want me to come out during the week. And I'm like, no. No, thank you.
In the week?
Yeah, during the week. I work tomorrow. I am very happy at home. Thank you.
But it's interesting. Yes, the payments on fools actually did take a real downturn. So I wonder what happened to them. What happens if you're an unemployed fool?
Oh.
I suppose you probably might get to work in another... Work seems odd, doesn't it? In another big household somewhere, yeah. Anyway, that showed how there were parts of Henry VII's life and reign that we would have known nothing about, but for Heron's accounts, wouldn't have known he had a dragon, or about that demoiselle and her 30 quid. And that was the lighter side, apart from the fools. But as we know, there was a darker side.
Well, the fools are a darker side, to be honest.
Yes. And that fire-breathing thing as well. Oh, I'm not sure. I hope it's some sort of
Mechanical.
Yeah, I was thinking Leonardo made things like that,
Yes.
didn't he? He made Lion. Heron operated from Westminster Abbey. I think why? I mean, we heard it in Caxton's episode that Sanctuary expanded to cover the area around the Abbey, and that Caxton may have found it expedient, in case things went wrong,
Yeah.
to be able to nip inside and say Sanctuary. I've no idea whether the same thing applied to Heron. Maybe it was central and allowed him to manage the financial matters efficiently because he was near the court. It does seem a bit odd. I mean, there must have been other offices. We know it had shops because Caxton had a shop, so perhaps it was more of a sort of bustling, what you might call a business park now.
Maybe. I don't know.
The Treasurer of the Chamber, first Lovell and then Heron, became, in effect, the King's financial administrator. And we aren't talking about the court or Parliament or even the Chamber. It's the King.
Right.
And it was largely in cash. By 1501-2, two clerks, John Daunce and Robert Fowler, were receiving and paying out around 3/4 of the Crown's annual revenue from offices in Westminster under Heron's supervision, and sending large amounts of money over to the Tower to deposit in the King's coffers. So the Chamber side of it is now dealing with 3/4 of the total, whereas before it was the Exchequer who was dealing with it.
I just don't I don't understand why that had a benefit.
I suppose if it's the Exchequer, the King has to go cap in hand to the Parliament and say, please can I have some money?
Right.
If it's under his bed, he doesn't have to ask anybody.
No, he just gets somebody big to haul the chest out.
Yes.
Put it on rollers.
To me, this sounds inherently dodgy. But I don't know whether it was. I found it difficult to work out what sounded dodgy and what actually was dodgy. Because we're looking at a completely different financial system 500 years ago. Mm-hmm. It's hard to assess what was normal. But I do feel that this probably wasn't normal.
No, it doesn't.
The Exchequer wasn't eliminated by the rise of the Chamber. Its powers were briefly reasserted in 1509, and I'm assuming that's when Henry started pardoning debtors when he had one of his crises of conscience and started panicking about the afterlife.
I'm going to hell.
Yes. But the role of the Exchequer was confined as the role of the Chamber grew. So the Chamber was taking on more and more stuff, and the things that the Exchequer covered was getting smaller and smaller. But it was important that the activities of the Exchequer should be coordinated with those of the Chamber, and in this, the new men, like Heron, played an important role by holding offices in both the Chamber and the Exchequer. Heron was Deputy Chamberlain of the Exchequer as well as Treasurer of the Chamber. And this meant that sometimes these people would be handing over money in one capacity and taking that same money in another capacity.
Oh, yeah, great audit trail. You can see exactly what happened there.
Yes, you're handing the money to yourself.
Left hand, right hand.
Yes. Well, the left hand really does know what the right hand's doing because it's on the same body. But there does seem a complete lack of scrutiny there.
Except that Henry was signing all those accounts.
He was, but what about everybody else? How did they know what was going on?
They didn't.
Parliament.
Yeah.
Who's to say if something isn't quite right, if the same people are involved in one transaction? It seems to be shrinking. It's just the people around Henry who are dealing with everything.
Yeah.
And everybody else is being excluded.
Mm-hmm.
That's the impression I'm getting anyway. The Treasurer of the Chamber became in effect the Receiver General of the Crown revenues. And it was gradually, almost as if the system was being sneaked in somehow. And his responsibilities included being the general receiver of all revenues of Crown land and all forms of revenues not processed in the Exchequer, which, as we said, was an increasing amount. And it was up to him to pay out money from that box under the bed for quite a large variety of things. So he was more than just the writer of the accounts.
Right.
He received the payments and accounts from the estates of Lancaster, Cheshire and Calais and Berwick, and from the Chamberlains of Wales, the customs, the agents of the sale of offices, wardships and marriages, and the collection of fines for favours or grace, and of the agents who collected the profits from prerogative rights. And I assume that last is the quo warranto that we heard so much about in Dudley's episode.
Yeah, that sounds like everything.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound like a limited list.
Well, the quo warranto, if people don't remember, is the king being so much the father of the people that he owned all their stuff, including their children, it turned out.
Yeah.
So I'm feeling more and more, you've got Dudley and Empson taking over the legal side of things and excluding everybody, and you've got Heron taking over financial side of it, excluding everybody. Henry is feeling very much like a spider in a very, very small web.
Oh, we're going to get letters again.
Oh, we haven't had any letters. Letter would be nice. Send us a letter.
Email.
Many of the sums that passed through Heron's hot little hands were small, but some were pretty hefty. And the account books for 1505 to 9 show the annual receipts were more than 100,000 a year, £100,000 a year.
Wow.
And the money paid into the chamber was mainly intended for immediate use, so it could be seen as Henry's current account. And they went on the private expenses of the king. And it paid for salaries and wages of court officials, provided arms and rewards. It clothed the king's navy and soldiers, and it paid for his spies.
Yeah. Secret business.
Yeah, and the extra money was invested in jewels and plates and, as we saw in Hugh Dennis's episode, property, which he got his groom of the stool to buy for him. I mean, that again is a very small world, isn't it?
Yes.
And yet even Heron didn't know everything that was going on. Some of the accounts Henry did himself. Which they were and why they were kept secret from Heron, I'm not sure. It wasn't that they were the result of extortion from Dudley and Empson, since we see those in Heron's accounts.
Yes.
And maybe it was the more shameless of their transactions. But in 1507, the fines taken from Mr. and Mrs. Suniff went through Heron into the King's Chamber treasury. So, obviously, there's no shame.
No.
I'm trying to work out what on earth was so secret, so awful.
Yeah. That's what I'm doing too.
Yeah.
What?
The bulk of prosecutions, or persecutions, ended up in an appearance before the Council Learned and a fine to be paid to John Heron. So this incestuous little world where you got the Council Learned and the financial chamber, it's all takes place just in one little circle around Henry.
Yeah.
And from the King's Privy Chamber and from Heron's Treasury offices in Westminster Abbey, Dudley carried away bags and boxes of legal and financial documents. So I was imagining him with bag marked swag. Heron sat at a desk itemising the files that Dudley had taken, so we've got that list. This would presumably have been part of his job, but it might also have been expedient for him. In an unregulated and unaccountable system, this would have been a way for Heron to leave a paper trail. At least that's what Thomas Penn said in The Winter King. Heron was just making sure he would be all right. I mean, if Henry gets overthrown, he could say, "Look, I wrote it all down."
I would too.
I didn't want to do it, so I wrote it all down so that everybody would know. But I don't know whether that's what he was doing or whether that was just part of his job. But Thomas Penn seemed to think it was highly suspicious. We mentioned in Reginald Bray's episode that there were transactions that did not appear in Heron's account books. A shadowy character called Edward Belknap was given a job similar to Dudley and Empson's in 1508, but the funds he accrued were not to go via Heron to the chamber treasury, but were to given to Belknap's accomplice, the groom of the stool, Hugh Dennis.
Yeah.
And, talking of Hugh Dennis, his name crops up again and again in Heron's accounts. Dennis had direct access to Henry's expense account. Was this so Dennis could get on with investing property, or was something more sinister going on that I really cannot work out what's going on? Why have they decided that this should bypass Heron completely?
I don't know, but it definitely feels even more sinister.
And we know that it was Dennis in his own name that bought the property, not Henry, even though he was buying it for Henry. It just seems... Maybe Henry by this point was becoming so paranoid that he was trying not to leave a paper trail. But why?
I have
Was it
no
just
idea.
paranoia, or was he doing? I want to know.
We do, but we don't have that info.
I thought when we started this, when we finish this one, I might see if I can write a book called Inside the Head of Henry VII. We'll know all about it by the time we get to the end of this.
Okay, and how's that book coming?
I don't know anything that's going on in his head.
Not at all. An enigma wrapped in a mystery.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I thought about doing a cameo on Edward Belknap, but he's far too shadowy for that. You can't find enough about him.
No.
But it was just as well for some people that Heron was keeping tabs on all this. In 1505, the Council Learned summoned a knight to explain why he hadn't paid his debts to the king. And Heron produced... I keep calling him Herod. That's a Freudian slip. Heron produced the paperwork to show that the knight had paid. So I'm not sure why they didn't check before they summoned the poor knight and probably scared him half to death.
Yeah, any summons could be anything. Gosh, that would be terrifying.
Yes.
You've been summoned to court. Why?
Why? We can't tell you. You have to wait till you get there.
Oh, God. It's like when the manager calls you and wants you to come to the office. Why? I haven't done anything. Please leave me alone. You get in there and it's something minor. Could you please go get a certain cup of tea that I would like? Oh.
Yes, why did you have to sound so sinister about it? The reason why the bonds and recognizances were quite varied in their outcome was that it was all effectively at the whim of the king. It was up to the king to give the last word on them. And in one of the chamber books at the bottom of the page of the recognizances, Heron entered the spine-chilling note, quote, about certain persons which are not yet through with the king's grace, and his said grace hath a list of their names, unquote.
Oh, yeah.
Not a list you want to be on.
No.
I should imagine Suniff was on that list for a while.
Probably.
Yeah, not yet through with the king's grace. We can spot key moments in Henry's reign, recorded in Heron's neat handwriting. On April the 15th, he recorded a sum that we might recognise, £108,000. And that was a loan to Philip the Fair.
Yeah.
Loan, in inverted commas. And it was accompanied with a note that said it was to fund Philip's next voyage to Spain to take over Castile from Ferdinand.
But he had to give up.
Oh, he had to give up Perkin. But I was just thinking there's no ambiguity there. No. Whatever Henry might have said to Ferdinand, he was paying to get him toppled from the Spanish throne.
Right. And
it's all in the accounts in black and white. We wouldn't know that that's what he was actually planning to do. We might have thought, oh, that's it. Wonder why he gave Philip that loan. It's there. It says it's to fund his voyage to Spain to get rid of Ferdinand. All sorts of things we wouldn't know about Henry at all, that we've sort of just taken for granted, but we do know. We only know from Heron's accounts. Yeah. January 1508, Heron recorded another large sum of £38,000 to be paid to Maximilian so that he could afford to go to Rome to get his magic crown. Bless him. And when Maximilian invaded Venice, it was with money taken from English people in bonds and recognizances. Wow. Everything's linked.
But so uncomfortably.
Yes. Yeah, reading about Heron, I felt that a thread was being pulled and it was all sort of scrunching up around Henry. Henry wasn't just an accountant, he was given other appointments. See, that's the other thing. All these people are given lots of appointments, so there's very few of them. He was frequently a commissioner. He took part in all the king's important business transactions. It says here, and was regularly, and obviously left out the important bit of that sentence, and he was called into the council because of his special financial knowledge.
He was regularly blank?
Yes, and he's regularly... And he was... I must have zapped it out.
No,
and not
I bet
noticed.
you somebody in the actual account got interrupted and then continued on with a different sentence.
No, that was me doing a Bernard Andre there. I'll come back to that later. So he was a judge, a lawyer, and a financial advisor.
Wow.
And probably more than an accountant would expect to do these days.
He started as a haberdasher's son. That's crazy.
Yes. By 1506, as Henry's chamber got his steamy little mitts on most of the agencies of the royal revenue, Heron became known as the general receiver to our sovereign Lord the King. So it's sort of just him. Lent 1509, as we said, Henry, after having a little chat with his confessor, offered a general pardon to his subjects when he was having that little moment, thinking, what have I done? What have I done? I haven't got Elizabeth to look after me. I've just gone mad.
And nobody else will marry me. Even though I'm looking cute with my little fingers over the edge. Hello.
Little fingers, yes. Oh, who can resist the little fingers? Well, all of them, it turned out. Heron's work for Henry VII went on beyond the grave. Henry's grave, not Heron's grave. In January 1503, work started on demolishing the old chapel at Westminster Abbey and building a new one to house that wonderful tomb designed by Pietro Torrigiano. By December, Heron had paid out more than £30,000 for the land the chapel stood on. And then, on the 20th of January 1504, he records in his account a payment of £10 to Master Estfield, quote, for conveyance of the King's tomb from Windsor to Westminster, unquote. So he's still shuffling money about for his old master, even though he's been dead for a bit. Under Henry VIII, Heron continued to oversee expenditure and to go from strength to strength. Yeah, although Dudley and Empson were executed at the beginning of Henry VIII's reign.
I was going to say, how did he get away with this? Because his hands were dirty.
Yes, I think maybe he could point to his all that he's written down and say, Look what they've done. I know, I told them not to. I wrote it all down.
Dear. This is why it's all in writing. I wanted to make sure you could see what they've done. The right people need to be taken down, and I'm not it. I'm the rat.
It shouldn't be assumed that the whole financial system had a complete overhaul and became benign and twinkly after Dudley and Empson's demise. Debts were still being raked in after Henry VII's death. The general pardon, when people were encouraged to send in their grievances, and 51 cases were overturned, didn't let everyone off the hook. Some cases were still pursued under Henry VIII. And when Henry VIII needed money for those wars, which we saw Ferdinand tricking him into, a council, including Heron, was set up to claw back debts to fund it, just like the good old days with his dad.
Oh, God, no.
This was taken over by Wolsey when Henry VIII said, hurry up, I want to go to war. And, I don't know, it was still quite dodgy. Sir John Savage and his son were pardoned for murdering a neighbouring JP and for abuse of office, on condition that they paid up £2,333, 6 shillings and 8pence. And that wasn't a fine, it was a bond, so you might call it a bribe for a pardon. So nothing's changed.
No wonder Elizabeth was focused on how the justice system had been so corrupted. We'll get to that in hers.
Yeah. Oh my gosh, that's a long way away.
Come on, we'll get through Henry VIII in like 3 months.
Have you seen the list?
Oh, goodness.
Heron was still Receiver General under Henry VIII, which was quite compliment to his handling of matters. That because Henry VIII might well have thought, those are old people, those are my dad's people. Henry himself wasn't going to take a close personal interest in the accounts and the business of the chamber like his father had done. You can't see him hunched over the account books like Day Ellis said he saw Henry doing.
Part of me thinks he can't even add.
Maybe. Or he's just not interested at this point, is he? From then on, the treasurers of the chambers were officially also the King's Receiver General. So Heron started a trend there I mean, he didn't intend to start the train, he was given the job, but the Exchequer officials could no longer attempt to contest the validity of chamber audits of accounts, as they'd apparently been able to do in Henry VII's time. So the Exchequer had been well and truly emasculated. So in a way it's got worse, because apparently the Exchequer could look at the accounts of the chamber accounts, but not anymore. 1513, he was involved in financing the Battle of Flodden. 1514, he was responsible for negotiations, if that's the right word, with the king's debtors. So that seems to be more face-to-face position than he had before. He's no longer closeted away in the counting house. He's up close and personal with people who were being told that they owe the king money.
Yes. I couldn't do that. Those people are probably crying and upset and, no thank you.
I don't know why I got this vision in my mind that John Heron was a nice, decent person trapped in a rather horrible system.
Oh.
And that he'd be sent there because he'd say, "Oh, I'm really sorry. There's nothing I can do. I mean, if up to me, I'd let you off." But he probably wasn't like that at all. I don't know why I've got this picture in my head of him. In 1516, he accompanied Wolsey to negotiate a loan for the king from Italian bankers. And I was trying to work out why Henry VIII needed a loan. He was left so much money by his dad.
Because he spent it like crazy.
It's only seven years on, yeah. There was the birth of his daughter in 1516, but not much else that you'd think would be particularly expensive. Your children are expensive. 1520, he attended the king at the Field of Cloth of Gold. So I expect he'll probably make a reappearance in the next season. I'm sure we'll be doing the Field of the Cloth of Gold. He drew up his will in June 1520, and that may have been the inherent dangers of crossing the Channel to go to the Field of the Cloth of Gold. Or his health might have been failing, in which case it was a bit much of Henry VIII to insist he travel over to the Field of the Cloth of Gold. June 1521, Heron started relinquishing some of his many responsibilities. He'd have been over 50 by then, but we don't know his exact age. He might have been well over 50 for all we know, but he died 15th January the following year and was buried at Whitefriars in London. And I was wondering how close Henry VII was sailing to the wind in the way he ran the economy. So I typed, "Were Henry VII's financial policies dodgy?" into Microsoft Bing.
And?
I received the answer, "Dodgy? Perhaps not, but certainly pragmatic." So there you go. Bing has spoken. Henry wasn't dodgy, he was just pragmatic.
No, I disagree. I very much disagree with that.
Yes.
I'm still haunted by the Empson and Dudley episodes. Still. It was so uncomfortable. That was not fun to learn about.
No, I listened to Dudley quite recently and it didn't, yes.
When people ask me about our podcast, I'm like, please just don't listen to Empson and Dudley. Unless you like depression.
Well, I feel Heron is sort of part of the same, well, he is part of the same system. And the system just seems to be shrinking before our very eyes. I found it extraordinary learning about him. I felt quite claustrophobic. I think everything's done by candlelight. All the rooms were getting smaller and smaller in my imagination.
And the money was getting bigger and bigger till you can't breathe. Ugh.
Yes. So, on that happy note.
Thank you for listening.
Why is this podcast so depressing? I don't understand these people. I wish I did.
No.
I don't.
No,
I don't wish
that
I
would
did.
mean you'd be somewhat like them if you could understand them. I totally get it. What?
Yes. Why don't we do that?
Are we
Or
still
do
friends? I don't think so. Excuse me while I, sneak away backwards.
Back away quietly. Yeah.
Well, that's the end of this episode. Thank you for listening.
Yes. Goodbye, and I can only apologise.
Bye.